There was a time in my life where I thought chaos was normal, and not because I liked it, not because I wanted it, but because I had lived in it for so long that I honestly didn't know any different. The strange thing about chaos is that when you're surrounded by it every day, eventually you stop noticing it. The criticism becomes normal, the drama becomes normal, the stress becomes normal, and walking on eggshells becomes normal. Just trying to keep everybody happy becomes normal. Trying to avoid conflict becomes normal. And after a while, you start believing that that's just, what life feels like. And for years, I thought I was stressed because life was hard. But looking back at it now, I wasn't just carrying responsibilities, I was carrying chaos. And I'd gotten so used to it that I couldn't even see it anymore. When my marriage ended, I lost almost everything. Most of you here know that story by now. I walked away with a pickup truck and the clothes on my back. That was it. I left a $500,000 house, a pool, a pond, furniture, belongings, pretty much everything that I had accumulated over my entire life, over decades. And not because it didn't matter, but because I knew fighting over these things were only going to create more damage for my children. So I walked away. I spent 6 months living in that pickup truck, and then about a year in a cheap camper. And at the time, it felt like my entire life had fallen apart. And honestly, in many ways, it had. But when I look back at it, something happened during that period that I didn't recognize until, much later. As everything was stripped away, some of the noise was stripped away too. And not all at once, but, little by little. And for the first time in years, there were moments of peace. They were small moments, but they were there. And what shocked me was how unfamiliar peace felt. And sometimes, even, in the beginning, almost it was kind of uncomfortable. But, that's how much chaos I had been living in. One thing that I learned over the last few years is that not everybody deserves unlimited access to your life. And I know that sounds harsh, especially for people like me, you know, people who are people pleasers or fixers, the kind of people who feel responsible for everybody else's happiness, the kind of people who answer every call, solve every problem, carry every burden, especially the ones that aren't even theirs. And then wonder why they're exhausted. Wonder why they're stressed all the time. Wonder why their health keeps getting worse. Wonder why they constantly feel drained. When I look back at it, I can see it happening in my own life. I just didn't understand it at the time. I thought the stress was normal. I thought the anxiety was normal. I thought carrying everybody else's problems was normal. And, I guess ultimately I thought living in chaos was normal. But I realize now that it wasn't normal at all. And here's the part that I haven't even talked about on this channel yet. The health side of all of this. What years of stress, years of chaos, years of walking on eggshells, and years of carrying everybody else's problems actually did to me physically. I haven't told that story yet, but I will because it's real. And looking back now, I can see connections that I completely missed at the time. The truth is, chaos doesn't just affect your mind, It actually really affects your body too. And that's a harsh reality that deserves its own conversation. So we'll leave it there. But for years, I didn't fully understand that connection. Now I do. For most of my life, I thought being a good person meant always being available. You know, I I think being a healthy person, you know, means protecting your peace now, because there are people who bring calm into your life and there are people who bring chaos into your life. And if we're honest, most of us already know who those people are. The problem is we make excuses for them. I know I did. They're family, I've known them forever. Maybe they'll change. They don't mean it. That's just how they are. I made excuses for years. And then one day, I got tired of excuses. And somewhere along the way, I developed a phrase that I say to myself all the time now. It's no more excuses, only solutions. That phrase has changed my life. Because once I started looking honestly at the sources of chaos in my life, I realized something. Nothing was changing. The same people brought the same drama, the same criticism, the same stress, the same turmoil, the same emotional exhaustion, year after year. And if I wanted a different life, I was going to have to make different decisions. No more excuses, only solutions. If somebody constantly brought chaos into my life, the solution wasn't hoping that they would change. The solution was removing their access to my life. If somebody constantly brought stress into my life, the solution wasn't another 10 years of tolerance. The solution was distance. If somebody constantly made my life harder instead of better, the solution wasn't pretending it wasn't happening. The solution was doing something about it. And that's exactly what I started doing. One person at a time, one solution at a time, one source of chaos at a time. Some phone calls stopped, some relationships ended, some doors closed. Some people lost access to me, not because I hated them, not because I wanted revenge, but because, they were part of the problem. And the more sources of chaos that I've removed, the quieter my life has become. Not lonelier, quieter. There is a big difference. Because when the chaos finally started leaving, I could finally hear myself think again. Peace gave me something I hadn't had in years. That's clarity. The ability to think clearly, the ability to make better decisions, and the ability to focus on rebuilding instead of surviving. It's amazing, what starts happening when the noise is all gone. That's when things started changing. I bought 10 acres. I moved into a dumpy old single wide mobile home. And I've been rebuilding it little by little. I've started doing things I love again. I started trying new things again. I started taking trips again. I started living again. Not because my problems disappeared. They didn't. I still have struggles. I still have challenges. I still have bad days. But it's amazing, how much easier it is to rebuild your life when you're not carrying everybody else's chaos at the same time. You know, when looking back at it, removing those people was one of the most important decisions that I've made in rebuilding my life. For years, I looked at the symptoms, the stress, the exhaustion, the anxiety, the chaos, without looking closely enough at where it was coming from. But once I finally saw it, I can't unsee it. Some people were adding value to my life. Some people were adding chaos. Eventually, I had to choose, which group would have access to me. No more excuses, only solutions. Because every source of chaos I removed created more room for peace, more room to think, more room to heal, more room to rebuild, more room to become the person that I am today. And after everything I've been through, losing everything, living in a truck, living in a camper, starting over at 50, I've learned something I wish I had learned a long, long time ago. Not everybody deserves access to your life. And if somebody constantly brings stress, drama, negativity, turmoil, and chaos into your world, you don't have to keep giving them a front row seat. No more excuses, only solutions. And these days, if I have to choose between chaos and peace, you can bet your sweet bippy that I'm going to choose peace every single time. Y'all, have a great day. See you in the next one.